2025 could be the beginning of the downfall of the United States. And I'm not saying that is just clickbait or a catchy title. No, I actually have reasons for it, and it's not because Orange Man bad. And it's also not because of tariffs. That is not how a country, especially a country like the United States, will fail. Not at this level. The problem is way bigger, and it's one that is way more difficult to stop or solve. And it's actually interesting to me that this is not what's dominating the news. Instead, it's squabbles over tariffs with other countries that may or may not even set in place. It's not that that's not good, and it's not that what is happening isn't big news, but it is just a fraction of the problem. It is not even a drop in the bucket compared to what's coming in 2025. And I'm going to walk through and show you exactly what is happening in 2025 that could be the first domino in a downfall like the world has never seen. Economics is not simple, and macroeconomics is way more convoluted. And anyone that says I'm predicting a recession or I'm predicting a bull market, they don't know. Nobody can time markets. That's actually just a guess or hearsay or a belief. And if it happens, frankly, they're just lucky. That's what happens. They get lucky. And the reason why is economics is so convoluted. The things that create recessions or depressions may not ever even be seen or known. They're called black swans, such as one country goes crazy and launches a missile, or a massive natural disaster could occur, or a bubble that after the fact everybody thinks was obvious, but during it, literally nobody really saw. And this is things that happened in like 2008. And by the time in 2008 that it happened, virtually everyone, 99% of the people that saw it coming was after 07, and it was already too late. Now, what I'm talking about isn't a prediction, and I understand that economics is convoluted. This is also why we don't really know the outcome, but we do know the problem that's about to hit, and we do know that it's not a singular problem. It's actually the confluence of two major problems that, if not fixed soon, will be devastating. If it doesn't start a domino to collapse, it will still erode away the future for Americans for potentially decades. So the first thing is we've got to go back and look at government policy. Now, macroeconomics, as opposed to microeconomics, looks at the interfacing of the government with the economy. There are essentially two sides. You have the government, and then you have private markets. Now, those obviously overlap, but they're two separate drivers. And it used to be in the United States, the government portion was a very small portion, and everything was the private sector. That has changed dramatically. And over the last 5 years, the government portion has become like 40% of the economy. And that's wild just to think about. In fact, at one point, it got to 45 and even close to 50% of the entire economy. Now, that was during COVID. But even after COVID, we didn't drop back down, meaning we stayed in that upper level. And we'd already been creeping up there. Now, whether that's good or bad can be determined by a lot of things. It's never really been good, though, for the overall strength of an economy and a private sector. Why? Because the government does not even have the ability to do what the private sector does. They can own resources that generate money, but they are not the actual generator, meaning that most countries that can have a large government and sustain, while the private sector can function at a smaller rate, it is due to a single source of income and a smaller economy, which is a tipping scale. Meaning like this, you have some countries that have mass amounts of oil and a small amount of people or a small economy, and the government owns the oil and all that it produces. And that way outpaces anything their economy could produce. So all of a sudden, the government itself is actually generating most of the money. And that has to do with just a single resource and size. That is not something in mass diverse countries like the United States that doesn't exist. There isn't one single industry that could even remotely get close to doing that. Now, that means that as the government grows, it is simply taking from the other side, which is the economy. That's just how it works, right? Good or bad, it doesn't matter. That's how it works. The government gets revenue by taking it from over here. Once the government becomes a major part of the economy, it is fueling it in the form of lots of things like jobs. In fact, the federal government's job level is about the same as 30 states' private workforce combined. Like, it's big numbers here. And they are generating mass amounts of revenue into the economy. They're not actually making it or creating it, as in they're generating by putting it in. Now, they are taking it from the economy, so you could say that's kind of like swapping spit. But that changed, and that changed massively when we started taking out debt. They started loaning, and then that money started to go in the economy. This change, while at first doesn't seem like a lot, but what's happened is over time, that simple change is fueling the economy at a level to the tunes of trillions of dollars. That means that this is getting trillions of dollars from borrowing from nothing. And then they're producing from the economy and the trillions of dollars that is put back in to try to pay back. It's a really, really bad situation and bad system, which, by the way, has never worked out ever. Now, we can talk about that, and we can talk about the good, the bad, but that's actually not the problem necessarily. The problem is the amount. Of course, we're at over $30 trillion of debt, but why 2025? You see, in 2008, the government had roughly $10 trillion in debt. At that time, it was argued whether the government could even support that much debt, the total amount of debt being $10 trillion. Since then, in a very short period of time, we have grown to over $34 trillion worth of debt in this country. Now, that's an enormous increase. It is enormous to the tune of something like this, as you can see in the chart. As in, it took us over 220 years to actually compile a level of debt that it only took us to compile since 2020 today. This level is unthinkable. But once again, that's not even the problem, necessarily. You see, the debt is being paid at interest levels that are like nothing, like 2%. Well, the average is around 2.5%. Overall, the problem is this debt isn't forever. So lots of us think like a 30-year mortgage. Take out mortgage and I end up paying it off. And by the time I pay it off, right, it's over. The debt is gone. But that's not how most debt works. By the time you get to the end of the term of the debt, it doesn't mean it's paid off. The vast majority amount of debt in the world is 10-year or 20-year or below. So government debt isn't taken out till the end of the term of the debt. It's only taken out for a portion of time. That means at a point in time, that debt will come due, and two things have to happen. That debt has to be paid for, or that debt has to be refinanced. Now, this is the ticking time bomb. You see, what you probably haven't heard of is that in 2025, the United States has $10 trillion of debt coming due. That is the entire amount of debt that the United States had in just 2008. And it is all coming due in 2025. That is the equivalent of 30% of our debt is coming due in 2025. That alone is not necessarily the problem. Then how does this become a bad thing or a problem into something that is catastrophic? There's how much you make versus how much debt you have in total. But then there's how much you make versus how much you have to pay. So just because that debt is $300,000, it doesn't mean that all your income has to go right to pay for that $300,000. That's not how mortgage is, and that's not how debt works. You're paying for the opportunity to use that money until you have to pay it back. And so along the way, you're paying principal plus interest. So when we look at your debt to income ratio, basically It's a portion, right, of payments that you have, which is defined mainly by the interest rate. Now, all of our debt, not all of it, the vast majority of our debt in the United States was taken out after 2008. Before 2008, in 2007 or 6 and prior, which was less than $8 trillion, we had normalized interest rates. But after 2008, we had the great financial crisis, which the Fed went and dropped interest rates. Now, the Fed had already done this in the early 2000s after 9/11, in which the government borrowed lots of money. They dropped the interest rates because they were afraid of a recession due to 9/11. In 2008, the bubble popped from that over-leveraging, particularly in the housing market, and it created a worldwide financial crisis, and it basically made banks go underwater. Overnight, almost these banks were underwater. They were worth nothing. And the economy was losing its ability to deliver credit. The system to deliver money, because debt is money. So day-to-day operations, payroll, everything else, everything is based off debt. All money in our economy is. That ceased, literally stopped. That is a death knell. So the government stepped in and they did a few things. They did capital injections and they did quantitative easing and they injected straight money into the economy. They essentially bailed out the banks as well as private industry, like the car companies. They injected mass amounts of money directly into the banks and became a non-voting shareholder to stabilize the banking system so it wouldn't fall. If the banking system falls, everything's over. You have no money. All money's gone. The economy evaporates. So they kind of had to do it. Now, how they did it, that's for another day. But the other thing that they do is they drop interest rates. And the problem was so big, they dropped interest rates to basically zero. That created an ongoing party of cheap credit. But the credit couldn't be deployed after 2008 because the credit system was still fragile. So it took a while for those interest rates to hit Main Street. The government, though, was running a deficit the whole time. Now, 2020, of course, we had COVID. The government took over the economy. The economy was only running because of the government, literally paying people, everything else. And so the debt all of a sudden rapidly increased. After that, you would assume they would have pulled back. But not only did that happen, the deficit that they ran after 2020 and 21 continued to be astronomical to the tune of 4 plus trillion every single year. The amount of debt they took on from 20 on was of historic measures. Like we showed in that other chart, it was what accumulated 120 plus years for the United States. But that's not the problem. The amount of debt's not the problem. By taking that debt, they also did like they did in 2008. They lowered interest rates. What did that do? This is what happened because of that. You lower interest rates and make credit available to everyone. And you start spending money to save the economy like crazy and putting money in people's hands. Now, in 2008, they had a hole. Everybody went bankrupt. Everybody went bankrupt. Like all the baby boomers went bankrupt. Everybody lost houses, everything else. So nobody had money. When you go bankrupt and that debt evaporates, that means money evaporates. So what happens is the money supply shrunk. The total amount of money, it disappeared to the tune of trillions upon trillions of dollars in 2008. Gone. There's a massive money hole. The government was trying to stabilize and fill that hole with injections as well as subsidy programs and on and on and on, including low interest rates. That's not what happened in 2020. In fact, in 2020, equity was high. Everybody had lots of money, lots of savings. The job market was incredible. And then they injected capital into the market and they dropped interest rate like a rock. There was no hole. What that did then was just increase the money supply. So the money supply exploded. What happens when there's too much money in an economy? You have inflation. You're like, AJ, great, thank you for the economic lesson, but I'm like brain dead here. Get to the point. I am. It's just important because inflation means interest rates have to go up. When you rise interest rates, you're trying to stop the growth of money supply or even shrink it. That's the problem. You see, in 2025, we have $10 trillion that is coming due at an interest rate that is double what it was. The amount we have to pay just on interest in the United States is going to be bigger than almost any other expenditure, if not all expenditures our government has. We will pay more on interest rate by a lot than we will pay on defense, health programs, on and on and on. In fact, there's a high likelihood we will pay more on interest rates alone than we will on Social Security. It could be the largest item that our government's paying. We're talking about over $1.3 trillion, which it could be as high as $1.5 trillion on nothing but interest. $1.5 trillion when the U.S. government doesn't even bring in $5 trillion. This is incredible. That amount of money when we can't even balance our budget anyways. Now, this doesn't just mean we can't afford things. And that's what a lot of people think. And this is where we have to start to dive into why this is a domino effect. This doesn't just mean, oh, well, we have to cut government spending, right? Well, yes, you have to do that. But it doesn't just affect how much you can spend. As we know, first of all, the government doesn't spend how much it makes. It spends more than that. What happens is you don't look very good as a country, as in an investment. Now, how does the government get money? It sells bonds, which are IOUs. Now, IOUs, if it's a really secure investment, people will buy that and the interest rate that they'll get paid is going to be cheap, like 2%. But what if nobody wants your bonds? What if nobody wants those IOUs? They're all like, listen, you guys can't balance a budget. This is not a good investment now. Then you have to pay people more to give you money. And so all of a sudden, interest rates go up and up and up. Now, as interest rates go up and up and up, so you can take on more debt, so you can fund not only your operations, but the debt payments you have to make, it becomes even more financially unstable, which in return creates interest rates that rise more. It's just not a government problem, though. And here's where things get really bad. As that happens, the interest rates to the whole economy change. They all go up. What happens when interest rates go up? Remember, the money supply either doesn't grow or it shrinks. That means economic activity. That means you don't get pay raises. That means you're not buying new things. That means the economy isn't growing or isn't growing as fast, or even worse, is shrinking. That means the United States government is taking less money in. Because remember at the first, two sides, everyone. The economy gives the money to the government. So now the economy can't make money because credit is too expensive, which had nothing to do with the economy. It only had to do with the government. This wasn't greedy businesses. And two, greedy businesses didn't create inflation. No, that was created by the tens of trillions of dollars that were printed and zero interest rates. So the businesses now that pay everything and the people that need to borrow money to live, like have a house and a car, which in the United States, a car for the vast majority of the United States is necessary to live. And credit cards and things that people use just to get by, that all stops. But then their job ends because the business can't get credit at a low rate, so it can't afford it. And instead, they replace things with technology, and you start to shrink this economy. Your revenue, how much you make, goes down, but how much you have to pay in debt goes up. So then the government does the only thing it can, and it starts slashing. And it starts slashing in a big, big way. it starts cutting everywhere they can. But this relationship that I'm talking about here has gotten to a point that this doesn't work. Let me show you. As you can see here, this is the yellow bars represent. And if you're listening to the podcast, this will be on YouTube, but I also have an entire YouTube that has a lot more charts and data you can all go see that is just about the bomb that's coming in 2025. The yellow bars represent deficit that is contributing to the money supply to the tune of trillions. What that means, just because the money that the government gives to the economy, that doesn't mean it increases the money supply. How? Well, because remember, they just took it from the economy. So they tax the economy, they take it in, and then they put it back in the economy. That's not growing the money supply, that's swap and spit. But when the government takes out debt and then puts it in the economy, that money didn't exist. And so you just inject capital into the economy, and that increases that money supply. So as you can see, the amount of money going to the economy from the government prior to 2020 was relatively low, but we had really low inflation or interest rates. That, and as the government started to spend more, that created inflation. So what did they do? As you can see here, then the blue line is they lifted interest rates, which immediately made inflation come back down. But why didn't they lower interest rates? Why are interest rates still high? Why can't you buy a house? As you can see in this chart, after 2020, they continued to spend money to the point of $4+ trillion a year. Remember, the United States government takes in roughly $4 to $5 trillion. That means the government was borrowing and putting into the economy the equivalent to its entire takeout, all taxes, all revenue. That money didn't exist. It wasn't created. That money going into the economy now is literally the gap of what the economy should have shrunk and essentially disappeared out of the money supply. That means you can't get inflation to come down. So inflation came down, but they couldn't get it down any lower, and they dropped interest rates just a little, and guess what happened? Inflation popped back up. Why? Because the government is now playing the economy and not letting the money supply shrink. In fact, the Federal Reserve hinted at this, as in, we're trying here, but we can't lower interest rates because, well, somebody is putting trillions of dollars into the economy. And so the economy now is big time being driven off the government. This relationship, as you can see now, the economy is fueled off debt, of course, but that is productive debt, meaning that when you buy a house, you actually have to pay it off. When a business buys debt, it has to pay it off, and then you have to work and earn for it. If you don't, all your assets are taken. You go bankrupt, and then you have banks as well as individuals that lose everything. That money disappears, and it's gone from the money supply. It's a loss. Value is gone. Assets are gone. The government's borrowing money and injecting it in that is not producing anything. As in, that money didn't come from production. This massively inflates the money supply. Obviously, money supply increasing causes inflation. This connection that I talked about at the beginning of the government to the economy is now so connected that if you stopped spending, the economy would lose $5 trillion. That is a recession, and a big one. So the argument, of course, is the economy even really growing? Which has been my argument. We are in a recession. It's just the government's giving the economy $5 trillion a year in borrowed money. Remember, it was not doing that before. Prior to 2020, The government wasn't even injecting $500 billion into the economy that was not taken from taxes. So it was not swap and spit. This was new money that went to the money supply. After 2020, that changed. The largest injection of money from any industry or anything today is the government. That is so artificial. And frankly, it's done by politicians that are trying not to have the bad effects of a recession. They don't want a recession. They don't want things to contract. So instead, they just borrow money and throw it into the economy and say, look how good the economy's done. And this is what happened and why everyone said, you're saying things like the economy's growing, the stock market's growing, assets are growing, but my life is worse. I may be making more money, but I don't have more money because everything costs more. Why? Because the government's throwing money in. So everyday people are watching TV, CNBC, and they're seeing stock market up, GDP is up, look how good the economy is doing. And they're hearing politicians tell them the economy's good. While everybody's sitting here going, listen, I may have a job, but I feel like I'm in a recession. I don't feel like I have more money. I'm struggling here. This is really hard. We're struggling to eat. Main Street was in a recession. Individuals felt a recession. Job market was incredible because everybody had to have 2 or 3 jobs. And the government was hiring 50% of the new jobs. So once again, it was the government. That relationship right there shows you the massive problem we just backed ourselves into. If the government stops spending, the economy contracts and goes into a recession. If the government doesn't stop spending, we have a debt crisis which could lift up inflation and create more pain for Main Street and could make massive long-term problems. But they were willing to do that before. But now in 2025, we have to refinance $10 trillion, which will add on over $400 billion in interest payment to a government that is already out of control with its debt. But now it's twice as expensive. 30% of the total debt. And that could create a situation where interest rates not only can't come down, our core interest rates can't come down. What do? You have that much debt, you're paying that much, you have to stop running deficits, you have to stop taking on debt, but if you do, it's attached to the economy. I understand why maybe people don't talk about this because it can be confusing. It really is not that confusing, and let me make it simple here. You have a mortgage for $1 million. You make $200,000. That mortgage was financed at 3%. And then your mortgage goes to 6%. You can't pay your mortgage anymore. That's what's happening in 2025. Now, what does that mean? There's a few things that can happen. And there's one theory that I thought of. I don't know that it is true or not, but the current administration could literally be trying to drive us into a recession with the single purpose of getting interest rates down. The United States can't get interest rates down because the economy is doing not only good, but we've been spending $5 trillion into the economy. If they wouldn't have done that, interest rates would have gone down. But now we're stuck where we have to refi. So the question becomes, is it better to go into a recession to have interest rates drop so we can refi $10 trillion and save taxpayers and all of us hundreds of billions of dollars a year just in interest and make it so we're not worried about an escalating position because this is just 2025. We have more coming due every single year after that. Is it worth short-term pain to stave off what could be a much, much bigger problem? The problem's so big, the economy can't outgrow it. We can't just grow the economy now to overcompensate for all the debt we have. That would mean our economy would have to grow at like 10%, which is not only unrealistic, that is wild, right? I mean, that would probably actually destroy, well, everything if we grew that much. I mean, we don't even have infrastructure that could get close to covering anything like that. So that's not possible. When we look at this, there's a few things that is clear. Right now, the chaos you're seeing is the great switch. We are a government-ran economy at this point. They are trying to get it back to an economic, Main Street-centric driven. Now, you may like that or not like that, or you may say that's bad, but that's what's happening. As in, the economy can't be run by $5 trillion of debt being spent into the economy every year by the government. That doesn't work. So it has to end. We have to stop spending as much, and we have to get back to where the economy produces more than the government takes. But that's hard. That means you have to just absolutely slash spending. And if you do that, what's going to happen to the economy? That spending is going into the economy. That is what they're trying to balance. They're saying, how can we shrink the spending as quick as possible and give us more capital so we can pay our debt and our refinance debt without totally destroying the economy by pulling all of this money, borrowed money that's fueling the economy, and get the economy to not crash, not only not crash, but grow. This is why Trump has ideas like tariffs. We got to get money from somewhere to pay. We got to get money in to pay. We have $10 trillion bomb coming, a nuclear bomb coming. We also need interest rates to go down. So the theory that I've thought of is weird. Maybe they're actually trying. And they're like, hey, if we had 1 or 2 quarters in a recession, which, by the way, that recession may be really not even felt by Main Street nearly as severe as other recessions. Why? Because if you do it right, it would be the government money coming up, and people would obviously lose jobs. Unemployment is at historic lows. Wild. We have an employment crisis. And so you could literally have them, and employment will go back up to normal in a normal range, 5 to 6%. And that would limit greatly the impact. You're talking about 3% of the population. Well, then out of that 3% of the population, you have, 4% or 5% of the population, 4%, let's call it up at 6%, is now not having to pay trillions or hundreds of billions of dollars a year in interest rates. Interest rates go down. And then when unemployment goes back up, it is done from the economy, not the government. The great switch, though, is who is running this thing? Is it the economy or the government? We have not gotten off the government since 2020. It is not so simple, you guys, as just take on more debt and pay more debt. Why? Because the interest rates, the less they can afford and pay, the higher interest rates go. That's how it affects you every single day. You want to buy a house? If the United States government's struggling, the interest rate on your house, on your car, your business, or anything is going to be wild, higher than it is today. And if that happens, plus we don't get rid of inflation, we have stagflation. That's super bad. 2025 is a turning point for the United States, one that is of epic proportions. We can either get this right or we can screw it up. Now, why tariffs? Not only to bring money in, but the thought is, if the United States needs to go into a recession, bring everybody else with you. Why? Because their impact is astronomically more than it is to us. Tariffs hurt them disproportionately. If you tariff Canada and Mexico, as we've seen, their dollars have gone down big time. So the peso and the loonies and toonies have really, really gone down because it adversely affects them. It's much, much more of their economy than it is ours. So we could have a recession. They would have greater recessions, which means people would flock to our bonds, creating demand for the United States, even though we're contracting. Money, everything else would come in. It's a diabolical plan. You tank other people's economy and ours, even though ours is not nearly as severe. Interest rates come down. You refi the trillions of dollars at a lower rate. You cut government spending. You get interest rates to go down. That way, the private sector can grow and get off the government. Can that happen? I don't know. But I do know that's exactly where we're headed. They are trying to do the great switch. That's what's happening. Whether they're trying to do that to drop interest rates to pay the $10 trillion, that's just a theory of mine. But it is happening, the great switch, or trying to. What does this mean for you? And how do you get ready? We have been bringing in capital, lots of it. We have been preparing. We are getting amazing deals right now due to the economic situation. I'm buying. In all of this chaos, in all of this stock market going down, we're buying real assets. We're buying cash flowing assets. I'm buying businesses. And as that keeps going, we will buy and hope to buy more. This is a much better time to buy as things are crashing and going down. Now, I'm not buying as if it's going to be a depression. Now, what should you do if there's a depression? Nothing. As in, not only can you not plan on it, you can't escape it. So, even having cash in times of inflation, that doesn't protect you. In fact, you lose it quickly, very, very quickly. Your cash burns. You can be ultra, ultra conservative and put some of your investments into basics, gold, right? Keep cash on hand, things like that for a depression. But here's the problem and why I don't really plan. I'm conservative. I keep cash on hand, ready to go, but I don't invest for depressions because of this simple reason. We are very good at solving problems. 2008 should have been a depression. It should have been. And it was amazing what they figured out to do to stop it and make it not a depression. We will do a lot, including go to war to stave off depressions. That's what countries do. So there's a lot we will do to combat that, but I can't not only plan or control that, it's outside of any business cycle, but I don't know what that's going to affect. So there's really no reason to try to plan for a black swan that is once every 100 years. Instead, you be conservative. You make it so you're not getting in trouble, but then you invest in great deals that take care of themselves. They pay for themselves. Invest conservatively and value-based, so you're getting deals of lifetimes. And that's what we plan on doing this year and next year. The turbulence is going to be a lot. The economic strain is going to be a lot. But to say that it's simply from tariffs or foreign even affairs things, that's not the whole story. In fact, that's not much of it at all. The government debt issue, interest rates, this will actually drive foreign policy. This will drive all of those other things we're talking about. And if not controlled, it will start to cascade. And that will be very, very bad. That will cause much more dramatic actions to have to be taken, like slashing the government spending in ways we haven't seen. And then there's just a lot that will go into that we don't know, and it could be bad. But it is also the opportunity of a lifetime. Now, I've had on here a podcast that was the Great Depression coming in 2030. Now, the reason why was largely due to our data and what we've been looking at over the next 5 years that principally had to do with government debt that has arisen from 2020 and higher interest rates, payments on the system, and what's been going on. Now, that was more of a catchy title. Whether it actually happens or not, I don't know. But the time bomb for 2025 wasn't just catchy. It's happening. It's coming. It's just what we're going to do about it. Now, there's a lot of people, the Keynesians out there and others, that didn't think that this would ever be a problem. It's as if they thought that we could take out debt because we could always borrow at 2% because we can set interest rates. Just because you say interest rates are 2% doesn't mean somebody buys your bonds. Now, this is the nightmare situation that I'm about to unfold, and it's bad. If you want to see how the world really ends, it's that right in this time, not only do we not have as many bond buyers, but our market gets flooded with people trying to sell our bonds. That would cause interest rates to skyrocket. A lot of people don't know, since 2008, the largest buyers of debt are us, the American people. It's not China or Russia or anyone else, but they still hold mass amounts of government debt. If Russia and China were to flood the market with our debt, right at a time where interest rates were high, we had to finance and renew $10 trillion. Well, that could be a death knell. That would create a chaos and a crisis that would 100% lead to war. It would lead to a worldwide war where America would definitely go to war with China if they did that, because they would destroy our means to even function. Now, let's hope things like that don't happen. And I know this is a pessimistic podcast this time, but part of being able to take advantage of the upside is to understand the downside. That actually leads you to know where opportunities are. Thinking that there's no downside or not understanding, that makes you dumb money. We don't want to be that. Once again, I'm not predicting a recession. I'm not predicting a depression. I am telling you a reality of what is happening in 2025. And that reality is that interest rates are the highest that we've seen in a generation. And we have 30% of the United States government coming due, which is the total amount of debt that our government had in 2008 at the same time this year. And if something doesn't change fast, that will explode our payments in the United States at a time where we haven't had a balanced budget since 94, 95. The problems the world's faced today are not companies. They're not economic. They're government. The economic problems we face are absolutely government caused. Inflation was due to the trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars that were printed and sent into the economy when the economy hadn't lost any money. It wasn't corporate greed. Not that that didn't happen afterwards, of course, but that did not cause worldwide inflation. Hopefully, this will not be nearly as big of a problem. Interest rates will come down. Maybe Trump is trying to do something crazy like drive us into a recession, lower interest rates, we refinance, we can cover our debt. YouTube video that shows all our charts and dives into it, as well as long form with all the data. Make sure you're following the newsletter. You can follow it in the bio here. We have it down, link. Go check it out. You're going to get all of the data and our charts that kind of break it down and show you everything so you can see what we're looking at in 2025. Please drop in the comments. Let me know what you're seeing. Let me know what you think about this year. And most importantly, is Trump just a lot smarter than we all thought? Is he trying to do this on purpose? Or is that really not something the government cares about right now? Thanks, guys.